everyone. We wanted to come on and give a quick spoiler alert and also a content warning for sexual assault, trauma, and violence.
Welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, LaTara,
Tori,
and Klara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
In this episode, our crew has arrived at this huge, creepy house, which seems to be the headquarters of this cult known as the Sons of Adam. It's also the home of Samuel and Christina Braithwhite, who brought them here to force Atticus to participate in an occult ritual to open a door to the Garden of Eden. Atticus manages to disrupt the ritual, and they eventually escape with Atticus's father, Montrose, but Uncle George dies of a gunshot wound as they escape the collapsing Braithwhite house.
All right, so to start off our episode today, we kind of wanted to introduce a new segment for our show, which we're calling the Bummy Awards. So for every show, we're going to be introducing a couple of things that really caught our attention this week. So for our first Bummy Award, let me ask you guys, who won the episode for you?
Who won the episode for you, Tori?
For me, it was the baby shoggoth.
Yeah.
I loved that thing for some reason. It was such a great scene because you start out like, why is she helping to birth this random cow? Oh, it's not a cow.
I was excited to see a cow. I was like, I want to see a baby calf.
Yeah. I was cool when I thought it was going to be a cow. When it was not a cow, I was
not
cool.
a cow. It was so weirdly tender. Like the baby was like really like nuzzling up against her and snuggling and like whimpering. It was so surreal to me, especially because we thought that the monsters reproduced by bites like vampires do.
Yeah.
Now I'm just like, how'd they get that thing in the cow? Where? What?
Yeah.
Basically, I'm going to adopt a baby shoggoth and get me one of those whistles and train it just like Christina Braithwhite.
I think you and I had very, very different reactions.
Very different. Like, girl, you go on and get your baby shoggoth. I'm never going to visit. Like, I'm sorry. That was terrifying. I just knew he was going to take a bite out of her neck when she like pulled him up. I was like
nuzzle it? Oh, man. LaTara, who won the episode for you?
Y'all already know what I'm about to say because I couldn't even help myself. Atticus is beautiful. Just beautiful. And I was really stressed out that scene where they like stripped him to like, wipe him down for the ritual. Because I was like, this just seems too much like preparing a ritual sacrifice type of thing. Despite that, the part of my psyche that is perfectly comfortable with ratchetry was still like, yo, he's fine. like obscenely and absurdly so. And I already told y'all I was going to propose to him. And I just feel like this is only solidifying my belief that he is my soulmate and we should get married and have babies. So, yeah.
He is super fun.
Mm-hmm.
Your babies will be cuter than the shoggoth babies.
They really will. Like, y'all, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Don't encourage me, okay? I don't want to be one of those creepy stalker chicks. I don't know. I might do it though. I just might do it. We'll see.
I think we should normalize creepy stalker chicks because I think our critique of creepy stalker chicks is incredibly sexist. We're all creepy stalker chicks.
Good points.
No. Actual stalkers not take this
not actual
as our permission to stalk people. We are joking.
Disclaimer, do not actually stalk people.
Yeah, like don't like sue us too. Like please, like, don't sue us. We're grad students. We have no money. Like we're literally just talking mess.
We have no money, just opinions.
No, exactly. No money, just opinions.
Can I pay you with opinions?
Okay, Klara, who won the show for you?
I really love Uncle George. I think it's I don't know why. Oh, I do know why. He reminds me of like my own uncles. He's just so wonderful and so loving and nurturing and caring, and he loves books and I love books. I think that the actor who's playing him, Courtney B. Vance, is doing a really fabulous job. I also really like Michael K. Williams, so I was like excited to see him like finally emerge in the latter half of the episode with his like hands like bursting through the through the soil.
Yes, that was a good moment.
That really was.
Okay, for our next Bummy Award, we went back and forth about what to call this. We don't want to call this the best scene because sometimes the most standout scene is not a good scene. So let's call this the most interesting scene or the most impactful scene. For me, it was the scene where everyone was hallucinating. But not just the hallucinations themselves, which by themselves were extremely impactful and terrifying and exciting in all sorts of ways. But the moment when it cuts to all of the sons of Adam like milling around the room and watching through those portals, that was just like so chilling how their like their horror and their mess was just being sensationalized and turned into entertainment for these people they don't even know. It was just really chilling.
Absolutely.
Really unsettling, like really really disturbing.
It really was. And the fact that they knew that they were being watched afterwards. Oh gosh, I can't even imagine.
Oh yeah. I obviously knew that, but listening to you, Tori, just say that like really solidified like the terror, like the profound discomfort of like knowing that just happened to you. Ugh.
Yeah, the just like exposure and like having to work through all of the terrible emotions dragged up by that hallucination with the knowledge that somebody else is also able to like rummage through your mess.
I think the thing, like, to kind of piggyback off of you, that freaked me out, not quite as bad as the hallucinations themselves and the concept of them being watched as they are terrorized, but the way that they just emerged from their room and immediately like had to go to dinner.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, and they're all like clearly like very shaken psychologically, and rather than even having the space or the time to process that emotions, it's like, no, like we have to put on suits and like go to dinner.
It all up.
Yep. And then like, Letty like can't even go to dinner. She has to go like eat on the veranda
by herself.
And it's just like, and like even like Uncle George, in that moment, like the way he rallied them and was like, this is what they want. Like, we're not going to like give them like what they want, which is to see how utterly like shaken we are. It still made me so sad that they couldn't be shaken in that moment. They couldn't just allow themselves to like process their terror. They had to put on a show and button it up.
Horrifying. What about you guys? Did anyone else have a most impactful scene?
For me, it was at the end of the ritual, when it was, so there were two things, right? When I assume this was Hannah, Atticus's ancestor, who escaped the original fire back in 1833 or something like that.
Man, they can't keep a house around here.
They can't. And it's like, this is my thing. At the last time y'all did this ratchet ritual, the entire house collapsed into ashes, and you think the smart thing is to do it again?
I'm like,
clearly,
no. Yes.
No, just like this is terrible decision making.
No, they're really terrible. Not only are they terrible and racist, they're also stupid.
They're so stupid. Yes, right. Like, pick one. But no, I really enjoyed, one, the fact that like in theory they were supposed to be opening a gateway to the Garden of Eden, and if that were true, then him looking through this portal, the implication is that in the Garden of Eden there rests a Black woman, a pregnant one, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It also, for me, because like Adam and Eve are supposed to be in the Garden of Eden, right? But like if you look through the portal and you see a Black woman instead, it's like, all those like classic portrayals. And I think someone said this in the notes too, but like paintings of like potentially Adam and Eve throughout the house, and they're white, like the figures are all white, but then you look through this portal and instead you see a Black woman. So I liked that. I also liked that it kind of, the two rituals seem to sort of cross across time, or to intersect across time. And I say that because there was no actual fire in the ritual in the show, but we know that there was a fire at the end of the ritual in 1833. And so you see the phantom flames popping up as Atticus is running through the hallway to the exit, and Hannah leads him there. So it's like he's following, like, I don't know if it's her spirit, her phantom, or just an echo of what happened already on that land many years before. Whatever it is. But that sort of crossing of timelines, the blurring of past and present, I really enjoy, and I feel like there's quite a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, like he wouldn't have made it out if someone who knew the house wasn't leading him then. Like, if this house wasn't a replica of the old house, if this cult wasn't so stuck in their ways, like, if history wasn't repeating itself now, like, he wouldn't have survived.
That's a really good point, Tori, that, like, it was like this cult being stuck in their ways, and the decision to remake something that had already been destroyed. Like, I don't know if, like, for their own egos or for tradition or whatever. But you're right. Like, he wouldn't have been able to get out because Hannah knew the old house, which means she already knew the current one and was able to lead him to safety. A lot in there. What about you, Klara?
I had a hard time picking a scene. There was a lot that happened this episode, plot-wise, thematic-wise as well. But I think for now, I'll say the scene where Atticus walks in on the liver removal with Samuel Braithwhite on the table with the hooded figure calling back to the clan, performing the liver removal, I think to me was kind of one of the moments in the episode where it really solidified the particular tone of this particular episode, in terms of, like, the goriness, the bodily horror of it all, and talking about that aspect of the horror genre, or this genre of horror. I think it introduced Samuel as a pretty compelling villain for this episode, and also kind of like introduce some of, like, the kind of the particular magical qualities of this episode here as well in this particular scene. And it's also just kind of like, it was totally very interesting to me to have Atticus, like, walk in after being really unsettled from their experience in the village, to walking in suddenly and almost randomly on this very, really gory and really, really graphic ceremonial liver removal.
And we should probably also talk about the sister scene of all of the sons of Adam getting served the liver.
Yeah.
Or not talk about it.
Very gross. One of the things that I wanted to say about it was that it reminded me of the Prometheus myth, where his punishment for bringing fire and knowledge to man was that he was chained to a rock, and then an eagle would eat his liver every day. And kind of like I think the smartness of the writing to talk about how the Prometheus myth and kind of like the contemporary white supremacist understandings of, like, Greek mythology as is, like, the predecessor for whiteness as it is today, which we know is not, which we know is anachronistic. But tying that as well, and mapping it onto, like, the Genesis myth, which we also know has anachronistically been whitewashed. And talking about knowledge and the different kinds of knowledges that are at stake here with our characters, between our villains and the kinds of knowledges that our protagonists also value. Also, it's just gross.
It's gross. But also, like, there's so much hubris in it. He's like, I'm Prometheus.
Oh my God.
I'm going to feed you this flesh of my flesh. I am Adam.
I am
a god. Like, oh my gracious. You're not that cool.
At all. Completely. I'm just like, I remember the thing that just constantly struck me, like, listening to Samuel and, like, his ridiculous visions of delusions of grandeur is, I'm just like, you're crazy, right? Like what you're doing is these are clear signs of psychosis. No, like, you allow someone to take a piece of your liver while you were conscious for who knows what ridiculous reason.
Just so they could eat it. Like,
just
so they could have the worst snack ever. Like,
the absolute worst snack ever. I'm like, you literally gave all your fellow club members a piece of your liver to eat. Bro, that's nuts. That's nuts. That's a terrible decision. Okay. It's terrible. I'm just like, he's so like arrogant and so like, oh, I'm like, yeah, I'm Adam. I'm so cool. And I'm like, you're insane. It's not cute at all.
No, he's super nasty.
He's so super nasty. He's so, like, I don't know. It's wild. It's like, I think hubris was such a perfect word because like there's something in like that hubris is like, no, not just like pride or ego, but it's like to such an extreme that it like enters the realm of like the unreasonable, the fantastical, the delusional, perhaps, which is why people who, like, right, and like classic Greek mythology, those who have hubris have a pretty intense fall by the end of it.
Which, same, Samuel.
It literally gets petrified. I thought that was hilarious. like he's cast in stone. And that just seems, I can't figure out entirely what the metaphorical or the allegorical meaning that we're supposed to be deriving it from, but it seems to me to be pretty.
I could see it going with the snakes, maybe, like Medusa.
Oh yeah, with Medusa
or Basilisk. We could also
that's
go
a really
like
good point. Yeah,
we could also go like there was so much emphasis on flesh this time, and they like.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Oh,
denied the part or even accelerated the process of returning to dust.
Yep. And I thought that was interesting that that in the first time the house was very clearly destroyed by fire, but in this time it was like, I mean, the sons of Adam were turned to stone, but I don't know if the rest of the house was, or if it just like kind of collapsed into ashes and dust, but without the fire. So I thought that was a pretty interesting turn.
I'm gonna be honest, I was kind of unclear about how the ritual got disrupted. So, I'm not like super mad about it, but I would just like to point out that was uncertain for me.
I think like what I was thinking is that it was disrupted because it was ineffective, because what we know as the audience, is our own thing, but the members of the Sons of Adam just like clearly had something wrong factually about their connection to the Garden of Eden. Like we might not know, we might not know what it is, but I think we're supposed to interpret that their entire body of knowledge is profoundly fallacious, and wrong, and then didn't work for a multitude of reasons, and then was explicitly manifested or was catalyzed. I'm not quite sure how I want to articulate this, but was brought about by the ghost, the presence, to borrow LaTara's, the echo of Hannah, and her role in disrupting the cyclicality of it, but also like her role in disrupting the ceremony, her role in leading Atticus and the rest of our protagonists to safety. Well, relative safety.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's what I was thinking, was how that was coming about.
I really like that. The thought that like perhaps this is an indicator that their entire body of knowledge is fallacious. That like everything they think they know, oh no,
it's wrong.
I like that interpretation. I hadn't thought of it. That's good. I feel like I'm gonna turn that one over in my head a few times.
All right, then we should move along to our last Bummy Award. This award is the Cross Country Award, and this award goes to the theme of the show that we feel was most compelling this time and is most relevant to today's society. So we're going to go ahead and hit these real quick because we're going to go on to elaborate a lot more on these themes for the rest of the show. So for me, I was really struck by what they were trying to bring in regards to feminism this time, because it really seemed like they were setting Christina up as a sort of like example of white femininity and how that was also a marginalized position in the 50s. So I'm really interested in what they're trying to do there with feminism.
I think so. One of the themes that I came back to a lot was the recurrence of Black trauma, particularly moments where something extremely horrific happens to any of our protagonists, and they don't have the time, the opportunity, the space to process what they've just experienced. One thing we talked about was like how many times we see Letty, Atticus holding back tears or trying to stop themselves from crying. And I think that theme has very interesting connections to today, and sort of like the assumption that when things happen that are traumatic for Black people, it's consumable, right? Thinking about like videos of police brutality that are circulating on the internet, and also that Black people have to hide or put off the processing of this trauma so that they can continue to function in an everyday society. So, for example, all the people who had to go to work that Monday after George Floyd's video went viral and had to sit visibly, as I am now in meetings with their non-Black coworkers, bosses, students, whatever, and still function and still perform. So yeah, definitely Black trauma I see as a recurring theme, both in the show and in the present.
For me, partially because this is my own academic research interest, as to probably why I was drawn to it, was to borrow a coinage from Saidiya Hartman, the afterlives of slavery, especially specifically in the moments of, or the historical moment of Jim Crow itself, and the reverberances, the recapitulations, the repetitions of the historical institution of slavery and how it impacts the lives of our contemporaries, or the ones, or of the people immediately after emancipation, and how it affects lives in a multiplicity of factors.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for sharing your Bummy Award winners for today. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So just, I guess, because I think your two cross country awards were related, let's hit mine first and then we'll go to you guys's. So what did you think about Christina here? Because of course it's problematizing the sons of Adam. It's introducing like the issue of gender. But I think that it was really fascinating because actually if you read the Lovecraft Country book, this character is Caleb Braithwhite, and it is a man. So they gender bent her to foreground those exact issues. And I, as a person who has read the book, I was kind of uncertain how to take this because obviously, like, women were in a position of marginality, including white women, but I wasn't certain how to feel about trying to like horn in this like white feminism, which has been really critiqued in the present day for the way that it excludes other voices who are marginalized by intersecting levels of, oppression. If you're like a Black woman, you have to experience the oppression endemic to being a woman and to being Black. So yeah, I wasn't certain how to feel about putting this white woman's experience and like kind of asking us to feel bad about it, kind of.
We are intersectional feminists in this household. I'll quickly say is that personally it felt a little bit contrived to me, and I personally had a hard time empathizing or sympathizing or whatever the correct word is. I can never remember the difference between the two, with Christina. And I don't know if that's because of who I am as a person, or if that's part of the that's part of the writing of the show as well.
Yeah, I think I really like. I'm so glad you guys both brought up like the question of like, are they positioning Christina to be like a character that the viewers sympathize with? I think my reaction to this scene was quite different, and I think primarily because both because like I'm a Black woman and also because of the discussions I've had regarding race, both professionally, right, and Black studies, but also just in my personal life with my friends and family. And so it's interesting because I can totally see, like, do they want us to sympathize with this girl? I can see, like, where that would happen. My gut reaction wasn't sympathy. It was more like, yes, Atticus, like, tell her why she's ridiculous, right? And I can, like, sort of expound upon that a little bit more. In the scene where Atticus and Christina are talking, leading up to the ritual, Atticus points out that in order for Christina to support all the things her father's doing with Sons of Adam, right? To sort of like broaden it to support his notions of white supremacy, she has to acquiesce to her own subordination, right? She has to be okay with supporting the aims and actions of this organization that she can never be a part of because she's not a man. And Atticus drives that home when he says, "You will never have this ring, even though I'm Black." Or no, she says, "I'll never have this ring." And he was like, "And you're white," right? Like, they're even letting a Black man wear this ring before they let you wear it because of your gender. And it's almost like he's saying, like, why would you ever support something that will never give you full access to their power? And so, yeah, it's like kind of like, for me, it was sort of a comment in terms of like, in order for a white woman to uphold notions of white supremacy, she has to also uphold notions of patriarchal power, ultimately working against her own self-interests. And that discussion wasn't, I read it as like, not that the viewer is supposed to feel bad for her, but that you're supposed to like understand in that moment both the fallacy and the futility of her decision to help her father, right? It's like, you're still choosing to do all these evil things to help your crazy racist dad, and you're still never going to get access to the same power that he does as a white man, ever. To kind of like think about it a little bit more historically, I think the reason I interpreted it that way is because of a lot of discussions that I've heard with my friends, with my family, fellow Black people that I've worked with, in terms of like critiquing the suffrage movement in the late 19th, early 20th century, right? Like when white women were given the right to vote with the 19th Amendment or something like that. And I don't remember, 1919, like, sorry, y'all, I'm not the best with history. It was in the early 20th century. White women got to vote. But they were the only women who got to vote, right? Black women didn't get to vote until the 60s. Any other race of women who were not white women, like, could not vote when they got the right to vote. And the interesting thing about the suffrage movement is that white women who helped run the suffrage movement, initially there was like this thing about the suffrage movement working with like civil rights and like both Black people and white women like working together to get the vote. And then white women in the suffrage movement were just kind of like, we can get rid of y'all Black people if it means that us white women still get to vote. Hence why a lot of Black people felt really uncomfortable with the push for women to wear white when they went to go vote for Hillary Clinton back in the 2016 election, because white was worn by the suffrage movement, which purposefully excluded Black people from that work. And so for me, that the commentary then in terms of like talking to Christina about her decision to be helpful to her father, even though it can't get her what she wants, it's like white women under systems of white patriarchy don't actually gain more power by their decision to uphold racism. So yeah, that's how I read it. It was like him pointing out, like, girl, you're working against your own interests anyway. Like you're doing things to help solidify your opportunity for power, and it just won't ever, because these white men who hold on to all the power will never give it up. Why would they? There's nothing to make them do so.
Your history lesson on the suffrage movement, I don't know what to call it, I think was very clarifying.
Yeah, that's just all the things that happened in my head when I saw that scene. And I think why I didn't necessarily read that as a moment of sympathy for Christina, but a moment of criticism.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying my thoughts too. Like, I think that's a much more, because I didn't want to like her, and I think that's like a much better way to think about it. So I appreciate that. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with her, because Caleb in the book is actually presented as a lot more like friendly, or at least like outwardly presenting friendliness towards our Black characters. But in some ways, this show seems to be aligning Christina with them more, by putting her in a position of marginality and emphasizing her position of marginality. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with her, if she like maybe will become an ally, or if she's going to continue being an antagonist. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about.
So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if she gets a redemption arc.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I
don't
think
know
like
what I want.
Yeah, who knows? Speaking of Christina, then, I think we should go on to talk a little bit about the Sons of Adam and the obvious resonances we're having here with our history of slavery, whether we're talking about the obvious references that they keep making to the Klan, which, thoughts?
As soon as I saw that white man in a robe, I knew it was all bad.
We know
nothing good ever comes of white men in robes. Okay, nothing. I just know. No, and then the fact that they're like their garb, like the hoods were pointed.
Yeah.
You know how hard it is to point a hood? Come
on. Difficult. You have to have a lot of cornstarch.
So, and the wizards thing, like they were pointing out like the relationship between that word and the hierarchy of the Klan too. But I think also there's this like interesting work they're doing with the like mystical lineage. We talked a bit in the last episode about like the chosen one, right? And like that often happens along a line of descent, which is the case for Atticus here. He is like the lost scion of the Braithwhite family, unfortunately tainted by, being Black.
She put quotes around that. Just
if you can hear the quotes in my voice, there were quotes. There were quotes.
There were definitely air quotes.
But yeah, I think it's interesting because his lineage is like not only is he Black, and his lineage is therefore like subpar according to Samuel Braithwaite's standards, but also it's like very matrilineal, which is, I think, different from the way a lot of these cults would have operated and like how it appears in fiction a lot of the times. So that was really interesting. Not only do we have Hannah, but we have his mom too. So like we have exclusively females along this line leading up to Atticus.
The lineage aspect of this episode is to be very tangled, and is referencing a lot of different things. It's like referencing the historical legal doctrine during American slavery, where the status of a child was determined by the slaver-free status of the mother. And this was. There's a very long and complicated history to this. The Latin is Partu Sequitur Venturum, which itself has a very like confounding history. Like some 19th century historian wrote the Latin into a legal statement, even though the practice had been in place for a couple hundred years before then, to kind of reference back towards Roman slave law, even though the practice had already been happening. And there's also referencing the one drop rule to determine what constitutes as Blackness.
But here, what constitutes Braithwhiteness?
Yeah, exactly, Braithwhiteness. And kind of like saying that, patrilineal ancestry here and white blood constitutes as Braithwhiteness. And it's all very complicated, and I think they're doing a lot of really interesting things about trying to reference or trying to put together a robust reading of racial lineage, especially in America, and the idea of hereditary race, which is itself very interesting because we know race is not biological, but has a history of biologized hereditariness. And trying to work through the different kinds of narratives and narrative logics in American racialization.
I really appreciate like that you brought up like the one drop rule, and particularly in this kind of subversion of it, right? Like particularly because like with the whole one drop rule, at least like, and definitely like correct me if I'm wrong, Klara, because I don't read as much in the like pre-20th century, but the way I understood it was like that was to determine like whether like your level of like blackness as like access to like legal rights under Jim Crow. Because if you like have, even if you have like, you know, the one drop, like however many ancestors back, you have that one black ancestor, then
you are then black.
You are then black, which means that you don't have access to various social and legal rights, or access to various spaces in the Jim Crow South. And so for me, like one of the really interesting subversions of the one drop rule was that in this case, it wasn't determining Atticus's, I guess, like legal power or social power, but his like magical power, right? Like,
yeah.
He had a little social power. He told all those white guys to get out of the room.
You're right. He did. I'm thinking more like in public spaces, like buses, and you know,
nobody's gonna be like
run of the mill cult.
Right? Like he still got to sit at the back of the bus. You feel me? But he can certainly do a magical ritual. that
he can be your magical battery.
Exactly,
magical battery.
So yeah, that was really interesting. How power is read there.
I think we also can't talk about this topic without mentioning the notoriously kind line, which I didn't catch it, but it is a clear reference. I was like, notoriously kind? Those seem contradictory. And then I was like,
like
Samuel Braithwaite raped his slaves. Just like so many slave owners did.
Yeah, my like gut reaction as soon as I heard what's the friend's name? The blonde friend who William. As soon as William said that foolishness about Titus being kind to his servants,
he was
quote unquote servants, totally his slaves. I was like, that sounds like that foolishness they would say about slave owners, like, oh, but they're so nice to their slaves, they can't be bad people. And it's like, yeah, they are. They're still slave owners. I don't care. So that's like immediately what I thought. And then they started talking about Hannah and like her escape from the house, and then Letty immediately knowing like she was pregnant. She ran through this forest pregnant, right? And it was just like so many things interlapping in that one reference.
And it just to speak to like the integralness in which the rape of slaves was to the American institution of slavery is that this was not just a thing that happened every now and then, quote unquote, but an integral feature to American chattel slavery was the assault of slaves and the rape of slave women and the pregnancy of slave women.
Yep. And especially because, you know, thinking about, which is I personally think like one of the most horrific thing about thinking about American slavery, or just like the slave trade and like the various locations in which like people of African descent were enslaved, is that in that process of turning people into property, right? Like the concept then is that you aren't raping women, you are perpetually creating more product to sell. Right? And like, and turning people into that is always horrific for me to consider. Like the moment where psychologically you look at a human and you see a thing and the profit that thing can bring, or the product that thing can make on your farm or in your mill or whatever.
And that's your child. Like they were enslaving their own children. They were like impregnating slave women on purpose to enslave their own children. Like,
because they weren't children. Like that, and that's the thing that makes it horrific, right? Like
I was trying to adopt a baby shoggoth, and they can't. They can't like their own black children. Like
no. It's easy when you separate humanity from it, right? Like this isn't a human; it's a slave.
And then how black women's bodies become the, a bearer or the embodiment of historical traumas, historical racial traumas and historical racial terror.
Thinking back to like my comment on like Black trauma, the moments that kind of hit me the hardest in terms of looking at that as a recurring theme was Letty. And thinking about trauma as something, whether physical or psychological, that leaves a mark, right? It leaves a residue. It leaves a sign that this horrific event happened, such that the person you were prior to that event does not exist anymore. That event fundamentally changed you in such a way that either if it's physical, it leaves a scar or a limp or whatever, or if it's psychological, that your behaviors change, your personality changes, your fundamental beliefs about life changes. And I think I thought of this as Black trauma because I just can't imagine a world wherein Letty and Atticus and George and Montrose experience all the horrific things they've experienced in this episode, which all the white people around them are just unbothered by.
In like the last 48 hours of their life.
Have been horrendous, right? And like I just can't imagine a world where anyone would live through that and not be a totally different person after it. Like in order to survive it, or just in order to like try to heal yourself after. Like I don't even know what that process will look like. But the fact that it was so obviously trauma for them and just perfectly normal, acceptable to the white people around them was so striking to me.
Yeah. And then it kept happening to Letty, and then she would forget it, and then she would suddenly remember the trauma or the terror of the initial interaction with the shoggoths and the sheriff in the cabin in the woods, which is a callback to another horror genre. But then she would forget it and then remember it, and then she would be shot and killed. I'm not quite sure how to understand like the magicalness of the Braithwhites, but shot and then would wake up totally healed, and then have to do something with like the fact that she was covered in blood but with no gunshot wound, and trying to process all of that.
Yeah, I think that's so striking. And two, I think it draws back to our discussion we had last time, and what I think will be a running discussion on this podcast is the notion of Americanness. I think what struck me a lot about LaTara's description of trauma is how someone can do it to you. We have this notion of American individualism where the individual is like inviolate, like you cannot do anything to me without my consent, like my body is mine, my spirit is mine. But this like notion of trauma just being a completely disfiguring, transfiguring event that can be like psychological as well as physical, it can be perpetrated on you by anybody who hurts you well enough, that hurts you deeply enough to make it happen. They can just completely shatter yourself as you have constituted it.
Yep. And in the reconstituting of the self after that shattering, how do you make the exact same self you were? I don't know if you can, and you're right that like that, to me, that's like one of the most chilling things about it. It doesn't matter what you want, right? It doesn't matter what you do or don't consent to, but you still have to deal with the aftermath of it anyway.
Well, I think that should wrap up our discussion for today. I think it's been really great. I really enjoyed this episode. Cult vibes always an A+ from this horror enthusiast.
That's a really compelling narrative.
Yes. And I'm looking forward to what's next because the house has collapsed. It's uncertain where it's going to go from here. Having read the book, I have an inkling, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to do. So if you guys enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us because this really supports us and is going to help us grow our Lovecraft Country Bumpkin community in the future.
And remember, never trust a white man in a hood in Lovecraft Country.